Louisiana's Way Home by Kate DiCamillo. Chapter 17. How could it be so hard to find a pink house in the woods? Well, it turned out to be harder than I expected. To begin with, it was dark and I could not see where I was going. And there were trees everywhere and tall grass and mean bushes. Also, it was unnecessarily windy. Something flying over my head, and I do not think it was a bird. Under the best of circumstances, I have never been able to tell one direction from another, and these were not the best of circumstances. I kept hoping that Clarence would appear and lead me to the pink house and to Burke Allen. In the story of Pinocchio, Pinocchio is lost and walking through the woods, and a blind cat and a lame fox come along and tell him a lot of lies. I had made up my mind that I was not going to listen to anyone who told me lies. Of course, thinking about lies made me think of Granny. That is, I thought about the woman who I had once believed to be my granny, even though she was of absolutely no relation to mine. I can tell you one thing, whoever she was certainly a big old liar. I was never ever going to speak to her again, and I hoped that she remained toothless until the end of time. Oh, I was mad, and also I was lost. And then I fell into a hole. It was not a deep hole, and that was fortunate, but it was deep enough to make me lose my balance and fall to the ground and drop the letter and the bologna sandwiches. I stood up. My ankle hurt. So I went back down on my hands and knees and I crawled around in the dark woods looking for the letter and the sandwiches. And because it was dark, it was hard to find anything. And my goodness, it was lonely. I almost wished that a blind cat and a lame fox would show up, even if they were just going to tell me lies. It would be nice to have some company. I crawled around some more and found both bologna sandwiches. That was a good thing. But I could not find the letter. The wind had taken it away. It was gone, gone, gone. Just like Grammy. I started to cry. I cried and cried. But since who knew what was going to happen next, I certainly had no idea. And since it seemed like a good idea to keep my strength up in such a dark and windy world, I ate one bologna sandwich and then I ate the other one. I cried the whole time I ate them. Both sandwiches were very good. Imagine Granny lying to me about bologna. She should have put something in her letter apologizing for all the lies she had told me, including the lies about bologna. And then I remembered that Granny was not my granny and that I had lost the letter informing me of that fact. I stood up, but it still hurt to stand on my ankle, so I went back down on my hands and knees and I crawled around on the ground looking for the stupid letter. I started to cry harder and louder. It was very hard to breathe, and everything smelled like bologna and a little bit like orange cheese. The world was so dark. I don't know that I had ever been encountered such darkness. So you can imagine how surprised I was when a bright light shone out of the darkness and a voice said, "What in the Sam Hill?" I stared into the light. I said, "I am looking for a letter and a pink house and a boy named Burke Allen." And then I fainted. The next thing I remember is being carried. I smelled something sweet. I said, "What is that smell?" A man's voice answered me. He said, "That's cake, darlin'." I liked that answer very much. I think that cake is a very good word in general, and that people should use it as an answer to questions more often. Darlin' is a nice word too. The cake smell got stronger and sweeter, and then I saw the pink house, and I was so happy that I must have passed out again, just from sheer joy. Chapter 18. When I opened my eyes, I was on a red-flowered couch, and 3 faces were looking down on me. One of the faces belonged to Burke Allen. "She ain't no bigger than a minute," said a man with very short gray hair. "Her name's Louisiana Elefante," said Burke, "and her mama and daddy were trapeze artists." I thought she was some kind of wounded animal," said the third person. He looked just like Burke, except older. His hair was blonde, too, and cut just the same as Burke's and the old man's. "I thought maybe she was a bobcat," said the blond man. He was surely Burke's father. "She was wailing like a bobcat." "There ain't no bobcats in them woods," said the gray-haired man. "I know that, Daddy," said Burke's father. "I'm saying that's what she sounded like." "Well, she ain't no bigger than a minute." "You already said that, Grandpap," said Burke. "I'm saying it again, ain't I?" "You are all Burke Allens," I said, because it was just now making sense to me. One Burke Allen was the father, and the other Burke Allen was the grandfather, and the final Burke Allen was my Burke Allen. Burke looked down at me and smiled. "Hey, Louisiana," he said. I stuck up my hand and waved at him. "Hey," said Burke again. "How do you feel?" "I feel strange," I said. "Maybe it's the old curse," said Burke. "What curse?" said the grandfather. "There's a curse upon her head," said Burke. "Now, son," said Burke's father, "don't go making things up." "I ain't making it up," said Burke. "She told it all to me." "Where is Clarence?" I asked. No one answered. The cake smell was very strong. The couch was flowered. Did I say that already? My ankle hurt, but not much. I felt like I was floating on a flowered, cake-scented cloud. Maybe I was in heaven. Granny didn't believe in heaven, but that didn't mean I had to not believe, did it? Maybe I came from a long line of believers. Who could say? In any case, the cake smelled very, very good. "What kind of cake is that I smell?" I said to Burke. And then there was a woman coming toward us. She had big blonde hair. She was smiling at me. She didn't look a thing like the blue fairy, but she smiled the same way as the blue fairy smiled. She was wiping her hands on a striped dish towel. She said, "Honey, that is my famous chocolate cake." Burke said, "Mama is making 17 cakes." Burke said, "Mama is making 17 cakes." 17? I said. 17, she said. 17 cakes. The room spun around. "Burke," I said, "I don't know who I am." "You're Louisiana," he said. "Did she hit her head?" said his mother. "There's a letter," I said. I tried to sit up, but I felt dizzy, and I immediately lay back down. "The letter explains everything. Actually, it doesn't explain anything at all. And besides, the letter is gone, blown by the wind into the lands of no return." "How's that?" said the grandfather. "The lands of what?" "We'll find it," said Burke. "I don't want to see that letter ever again," I said. I started to cry. "She's crying," said Burke. "I see that, son," said Burke's father. "Hey, now," said the grandfather. He took hold of my hand, and his hand was so rough and calloused and oversized that it was like holding onto a horse hoof. I cried harder. I had never held hands with a horse hoof before. "Thought she was a bobcat," said Burke's father. "No, bigger than a minute," said grandfather. He squeezed my hand with his horse hoof. It hurt, but it was comforting too. "Burke," I said, "Granny is gone." "Gone?" said Burke. "Gone," I said. The world smelled so sweet. I thought I would just close my eyes. Chapter 19. When I woke up, it was morning, and the sun was shining, and I was in a bed and covered by a big fluffy quilt. There was a nightstand next to the bed, with flowers painted all over the shade, and beside the lamp there was a red plate with a biscuit on it, and the biscuit had some ham in the middle of it. This was exciting because I was very hungry. I sat up. There was a glass of orange juice on the nightstand, too, and there was a note. The note said, "Honey, here's some breakfast. I thought you should go on sleepin'. Burke is at school, and Burke's daddy and granddaddy are at Burke Allen Machinery. I am at Maribel's salon. I will call and check on you at lunchtime. Don't worry about a thing. From your friend, Betty Allen." It was the nicest letter I had ever received. It was certainly the nicest letter. It was certainly nicer than what Granny had written to me in her letter. Granny, that person I did not know at all, that person I was not even related to. I heard a tapping against the window. I looked up, and guess who it was? Clarence the Crow. He was sitting on Burke's shoulder and leaning forward and tapping the window with his beak. Oh, I wished I had a crow to sit on my shoulder and tap on windows. I just knew it would change my whole life for the better. Burke was smiling and waving at me. I waved back at him, but my heart was heavy. What was I going to do? I couldn't imagine. I truly couldn't. Burke and Clarence disappeared, and there was nothing outside the window except trees and woods and a cloudy sky. Granny's letter was blowing around out there somewhere in that world. Well, I hoped those pages blew as far away from me as possible. I hoped those words of hers were blown by the winds of fate all the way to China. That's what I had hoped. And speaking of being blown by the winds of fate, where was I going to go? What would become of me? I could not seem to escape the curse of Sundarin. Bert walked into the room, still smiling, and I looked into his blue eyes, and that is when I recalled his words from the day before about finding a magician who could undo the curse. And then I remembered the sign on Reverend Obertask's door. Minister's office, Reverend Frank Obertask, assistance, advice, healing words. Wasn't a minister like a magician? Weren't healing words like a spell? Maybe Reverend Obertask knew some healing words that could undo the curse. I didn't need that granny person to undo the curse. And besides, I was finished entirely with counting on her. I would just get it done myself. I would get done everything myself. "Do you know where the Happy Shepherd Church is?" I said to Burke. "The Good Shepherd?" "Yes, that one." "Sure, I know where it is. Why?" "We need to go there." "What for?" said Burke. "Because I am going to take action," I said. "Don't you want to find the letter you was talking about last night?" said Burke. "I do not," I said. "I don't care if I ever see the letter again." "Also, last night you said your granny was gone." "That doesn't matter either," I said, "because I have a plan." "All right," said Burke. I picked up the ham biscuit and took a bite, and my goodness, it was delicious. "Aren't you supposed to be in school?" I said to Burke. Burke shrugged. I skipped. "I skip all the time. It doesn't matter. What do I need school for? You don't need school to join the circus." Outside the window, I could see Clarence. He was looking at us, cocking his head first one way and then the other. I thought, wouldn't it be nice to be a bird and to have feathers and not have a care in the world? Clarence probably had cares, because that is what it means to be alive on this infinitesimally spinning planet. It means you have cares, doesn't it? Why are you limping like that? Said Burke. We were walking into town, because in the tragic moment of darkness and despair, I fell into a hole, I said. Oh, said Burke. We walked over the train tracks. Clarence kept flying ahead of us and then flying back, looking down and laughing. This is where I seen the circus, said Burke. He stopped walking. Right here. I was sitting on my grandpap's shoulders. I don't know, maybe 6 years old. We watched the whole circus go by on the train. The giraffes had their heads sticking up out of the boxcar. There were lions too, 2 of them. You could smell them. They were pacing back and forth in a cage. And there was this clown. His face was all painted up and he waved at me. And that is when I decided I was going to join up with the circus. If you join the circus, you have to travel all the time, I said. You have to leave everyone behind. The circus is just one long goodbye. How do you know? Said Burke. And besides, I want to go out there and travel all over and see everything there is to see. I can always come back home if I want to. If I had a mother who was baking 17 cakes, I would want to stay right where I was, I said. Yeah, well, the cakes ain't for me. They're for the carnival, for the world famous Betty Allen cake raffle. I have never heard of the world famous Betty Allen cake raffle. Shoot, you haven't? I tell you what, people from all over Georgia just try and win one of Mama's cakes. For the rest of the way into town, Burke Allen told me all about the world famous Burke Allen cake raffle and how Miss Lulu played piano music before each raffle number was called, and how one year a woman was so excited about winning that she fainted dead away when Betty Allen called her number. It sounded fascinating, except for the part where Miss Lulu played piano. That was not fascinating at all. Is there a limit to how many cakes you can win? I asked. It's a game of chance, said Burke. There don't got to be a limit because it ain't nothing but chance. I thought that I would have to tell Granny about the world famous Betty Allen cake raffle because it was exactly the kind of activity she would be interested in. Imagine winning a whole cake! And then I remembered that Granny was gone, that she had left me, and that she was not my Granny at all. Was I ever going to get used to the fact that I had been lied to and abandoned? Well, I just could not say. All I knew was that my heart was broken into several hundred pieces, and I was walking along beside Burke Allen and dreaming of cakes as if the world were a normal place. Clarence was flying ahead of us, his wings shining in the light. The world spins on just as Mrs. McGregor said it does. It spins infinitesimally, and it never, ever stops. Somewhere up above us, Clarence laughed. I could see him. I couldn't see him, but I could hear him laughing. We walked past Bill's taxidermy, and we walked past Dr. Fox's office. I thought about Mrs. Ivy sitting at her desk typing out a bill and sending it to a person and an address that did not exist, and that made me happy. Down that road is Burke Allen Machinery, said Burke. That's where Grandpap and Daddy are right now, working on machinery. That's what they do all ding dang day long. They like working on machinery. And right there is the church, he said, pointing. You see it? Yes, I said, I see it. Me and Clarence will wait for you in the woods. I got to keep a low profile. I can't let nobody see me skipping school. And so I walked into the Happy Shepherd by myself. I walked up the stairs, and there was Reverend Obertask's office, just where I remembered it being, just where I had left it. I knocked on the door. No one answered. I turned the knob, and opened the door, and my goodness, there he was, Reverend Obertask. He was asleep. His feet were on the desk, and he was tipped back in his chair with his big arms hanging down on either side of him. His glasses were crooked on his face, and his mouth was open, and his face was covered in whiskers. Reverend Obertask looked very much like a walrus, and not one bit like a magician. The Georgia sun was shining into the office. It was lighting up all of Reverend Overtask, his nose and his sideburns and his mustache. I stared at him, and then I stared directly into the light. It occurred to me that the Georgia sun was different than the Florida sun. I knew that it was the same sun. Of course I did. There is only one sun, no matter where you go on this infinitesimally spinning earth. That is a fact. But there are facts, and there are facts. And one fact is that it is the same sun. And another fact is that if you are far from home and you don't know who you are, it is a very different sun. I was standing there thinking all of that when I noticed that Reverend Obertask had a pipe in his right hand, and the pipe was dangling so low that it was almost touching the carpet. Reverend Obertask, the walrus magician, was going to inadvertently set fire to the Sweet Shepherd Church. Chapter 20. I went very quickly and very stealthily into the office. Reverend Overtask, I said. He made a little snorting noise, and then he dropped his pipe. Dropped it! I immediately bent down and picked up the pipe, thereby averting a gigantic and tragic church fire. In the meantime, Reverend Overtask slept blissfully on. I was standing there, holding the pipe and staring at Reverend Overtask, then who, to my wondering eyes, should appear? Miss Lulu. Of course. She was standing right at the entrance of the office. She had her hands on her hips. What in the world is going on? She said in a very loud voice. Well, has never been an easy question for me to answer in any situation because so much goes on in this world. I stared at Miss Lulu and her curls. I smelled caramel. Did she have an unlimited supply of caramel candies? I am unsure exactly what you are referring to, I said, and I do not care for your implications. I just bet you don't, shouted Miss Lulu. And then Reverend Overtask woke up. He said, must have drifted off. Well, said Miss Lulu, explain yourself. Just a mid-morning nap, Miss Lulu, said Reverend Overtask. He took his feet off the desk and put them on the floor. I don't know that it can really be explained beyond that. Just a middle-aged man trying his best to make his way through this vale of tears. I was talking to the child, said Miss Lulu, the one who was holding your pipe. My pipe? Said Reverend Overtask. He blinked. I stood up straighter. I said, hello, Reverend Overtask. Here it is, your pipe. I held up the pipe. I came in here to ask for assistance and advice, and also to make some inquiries about your healing and magic words. But you dropped your pipe, and I picked it up so that there would not be some tragic fire. I did not want the tiny shepherd church to go up in flames. My healing and magic words, said Reverend Overtask. What tiny shepherd? He blinked again. He was a man with a very round and very surprised face. Also, he had a great deal of facial hair. I hate to say this, said Miss Lulu. I would advise against saying it then, said Reverend Overtask. But there was no stopping Miss Lulu. I think she was intending to steal your pipe, she said. I was not intending to steal your pipe, I said, stamping my foot. I do not need a pipe. Miss Lulu said, be that as it may, the child and her grandmother are staying at the Good Night Sleep Tight. They are just passing through, if you understand my meaning. The child sings, and she is engaged to sing at the Elkhorn funeral tomorrow. But I'm worried that something untoward is occurring or will occur." "Untoward?" said Reverend Obertask. "Exactly," said Miss Lulu. "Thank you very much, Miss Lulu," said Reverend Obertask. He sat up straighter. His chair creaked. "You may leave us." "But, Reverend," said Miss Lulu, "the child has your pipe." "Yes, she does," said Reverend Obertask. Miss Lulu sighed a very large sigh. The smell of caramel drifted across the room. "I will take it from here, Miss Lulu," said Reverend Obertask. "Thank you for your generous insights and kind intervention. Goodbye." "Goodbye, Miss Lulu," I said. It was a sentence that I liked saying very much, so I said it again. "Goodbye, Miss Lulu." "Yes, goodbye," said Reverend Obertask. "And please close the door behind you." Miss Lulu stood there with her mouth hanging open and her curls holding themselves very still. And then she pulled the door closed in a huffy and important way, and I was alone with Reverend Obertask, the walrus who could maybe perform magic. I was certainly in need of magic. Outside the window I could see a crow sitting in the crook of a live oak. I hoped it was Clarence. It was a nice thing to believe that a crow was watching over you. "So," said Reverend Obertask. "So," I said, "here is your pipe." Reverend Obertask reached forward and took the pipe from my hands very gently. "Thank you," he said. "You didn't tell me your name." "Louisiana Elefante." It was the first time I had said that name since I had learned the truth about myself, and I must say that the words felt strange in my mouth, heavy and dark. "Are you of Spanish extraction?" said Reverend Obertask. "I have absolutely no idea," I said. "The sad fact is that my parents are extremely unknown to me." It was strange to say those words too. Always before, my parents had been crystal clear to my mind, golden, shimmery, beautiful. But now when I thought of them, no image appeared. There was nothing but darkness. And that was sad, because before there had been so much brightness. I used to believe that my parents were trapeze artists known as the Flying Elefantes, I said to Reverend Obertask, but it turns out that I don't know who they were or what they did. Oh, I felt hollow inside. Reverend Obertask nodded. He said, "I see." His chair creaked once, twice, and then the office was very quiet. I could see dust motes dancing around joyfully in the air. What do dust motes have to be so happy about? Reverend Obertask cleared his throat. He said, "So you were adopted, I presume?" "It is a long and tragic story, full of dark alleys and twists and turns and many unexpected happenings," I said, "and also curses. There are curses in the story." "Curses?" said Reverend Overtask. "Yes," I said, "curses. Do you know much about curses?" "I'm afraid I don't." "But you're a minister," I said. "I am," said Reverend Overtask. "However, my day-to-day interactions tend to deal more with the garden variety issues, the loss of hope, the combating of despair, the balm of forgiveness, the need to understand, the short tempers and distrustful natures of church organists, that sort of thing. It's not often that curses come up." Out in the sanctuary, Miss Lulu started to play the organ. There was one huge crashing chord, and then a long silence. And then came another huge crashing chord. "I think she is frustrated sometimes," said Reverend Obertask. He smiled. We all push against our limitations, don't we? I liked Reverend Obertask. I liked his smile. I liked his walrus face. I thought that maybe he was the kind of person who would understand how it felt to sit in a motel room and stare at state inappropriate curtains and know that you are all alone in the world. I have a curse upon my head, I told him, and I was hoping that you could undo it. Alas, said Reverend Obertask, I do not think that I can undo your curse. I wish that I could. The sun went behind a cloud. I heard Clarence laughing. I heard Reverend Obertask breathing. I stood there. I worked hard not to cry. Does this curse have to do with your parents? Said Reverend Obertask in a very quiet voice. It is a curse of Sunderin, I said. So, yes, I suppose it does, because my parents left me in an alley behind a 5 and dime. Reverend Obertask nodded. He said, What a terrible thing. And it was a terrible thing, wasn't it? It was a relief to hear somebody call it what it was. Terrible. How could they do that? I said. How could they just leave me? What kind of people would do that? I don't understand. Reverend Obertask shook his head. I don't know, he said. I don't understand either. I have to say that Reverend Obertask was turning out to be something of a disappointment. He couldn't undo curses. He couldn't explain things. From the sanctuary came the sound of Miss Lulu playing Bach on the organ, or attempting to play Bach on the organ. I do not understand how someone could play the organ so poorly, just as I did not understand how someone could have a seemingly lifetime supply of caramels and not share them. There was so much I did not understand. The sun came out from behind a cloud, and then it went back again, light, dark, light, dark. I felt very sad. I said, I thought you would be able to help me. I thought you would have some kind of magic. On your door it says you dispense healing words. I can listen to you, Louisiana Elefante, said Reverend Obertask. That is the only magic I have. Do you want to tell me the rest of your story? Reverend Obertask leaned back in his chair, and it let out another creak. The dust motes danced around cheerfully. Miss Lulu continued to abuse Bach. I have a question for you, I said. I will do my best to answer it, said Reverend Obertask. Do you know the story of Pinocchio? I said. I do. Well, then you will know that Pinocchio gets separated from his father at the beginning of the story and spends the whole entire story separated from him until they meet up again in the belly of the whale. Yes, said Reverend Obertask. Will I spend the whole entire story of my life separated from the people I love? Reverend Obertask blinked. He said, I don't know, Louisiana. I can't see into the future. I do think that, more often than not, love has a way of finding us. I looked into Reverend Obertask's sad walrus face. It was the second time that I stood in Reverend Obertask's office and come to the realization that I was all on my own. It is a good and healing thing to tell your story, said Reverend Obertask. So if you don't want to finish telling it to me, maybe you can find someone you trust to tell it to. Either way, I hope you will come and visit me again. Poor, ineffectual Reverend Obertask. Perhaps I will visit you again, I said, just to cheer him up. He smiled at me, and I smiled back at him, but I did not use all of my teeth because, oh, my heart was heavy. And that is the end of chapter 20.